Hello and welcome to a live Kerfefe break on Deprogram with Carrie Smith. I'm Carrie. Usually on Kerfefe break, we bring on friends of the show, we bring on guests, we talk about what's in the news. Today, say a prayer for me if you pray, because I'm trying another one by myself, which I don't often do. I find it pretty awkward just talking to a camera. But there's a topic I really wanted to discuss today. And if you are someone who's been following along with my story or someone who's watched the program for a while, you may know why I started doing a podcast, which was to explore and talk about my old belief system, social justice ideology, and try to better understand what it actually is versus what it sells itself as and what people think it is. If you're new here, you may not know I spent 20 years in that ideology, pushing it as a true believer. And I know very well from personal experience that there are a lot of well-intentioned people who are in it who truly believe that they're doing good. They believe that it's a kind of liberalism, that it's progressive, that they're helping people, that they're fighting against oppression, that they're fighting to be allies, to be supportive. And they really believe this. And so part of why I started doing podcasts was to help better explain what social justice really is to some of those people. And over time, over the past 3 years or so of doing this, sometimes I get to that place that I think people get to where they just start talking to people who agree with them now, who've already seen the dangers of this ideology, for example. And periodically, recently, I've been trying to remind myself of the potential audience members, the potential people out there who might stumble across a video like this, prepared to hate it, prepared to think that I'm some right-wing, transphobe, racist, bigot, deplorable, or Trump voter, or whatever their stereotype is. They're prepared to think that. And I want to remember that person. And I know a few people like that in my offline life, people who have contacted me or asked me in person, I don't understand you. like I think I like you, but I think I don't understand you. That's their nice way of saying, but you're like one of those people. And so today's episode, I want to talk about this very brave whistleblower who just came forward, who is on the progressive left, who you would say, look, this person she describes herself as to the left of Bernie Sanders. She's a queer woman. She is married to a trans man. She's worked in gender affirming, I put that in quotes because I don't believe it is affirming, but gender affirming healthcare for children for many years as the manager of one of these transgender clinics at a children's hospital. And she just came forward and wrote this amazing, very brave expose about the harm that our society is currently still allowing to happen to children in the name of being a good ally, thinking that we're helping them. And in fact, she says, I thought I was saving trans kids. Like that's what she thought she was doing. But that is not what she was doing. And so if you are watching this and you are on the left, if someone sent you this, I just ask that you read along with us and you really consider this woman is not some liar. She's not some fraud. She hasn't been radicalized or become a Trump voter or whatever it is that you think is happening. I assure you, that's not what's happening. This is one of you. I was one of you. This is one of you who is saying, like, please listen to me. It's possible to think that you're doing the right thing because your heart is in the right place, but also be aware enough and self-aware enough to really evaluate the effects of what you're doing. So that's what we're talking about today. If you are a long-time listener, if you've been around with me the past few years, and I really hope that if you like this video, maybe there's someone in your life, someone on the left that you think you could send it to and just say, hey, this is kind of a good example of where I'm at. Like maybe you've got a friend, like I have a few friends still who are like, I don't get you. Maybe you've got a few friends or family members like that. So I hope that this is a video that you think is worth sharing. Thank you, Patriotic Gestalt, for the $10 super chat. Thank you. I should mention, yes, if you are a regular member viewer here and you want to support the show, we do have a locals, a Patreon, subscribe start, and we have YouTube memberships. And I appreciate all the support. It's what allows me to talk about these issues and for Mystery Chris to talk about the pop culture stuff on Wednesday night. So thank you guys so much. And thank you. I mean, really just sharing stuff like this with people in your life. That's the biggest thing you can do. People in your life who have been persuaded by social justice. So let's get to it. Let's get to this article. Actually, first, let me address one thing. So when I shared this article that we're about to read through, and I said, look, if you're on the left and you think you're being inclusive and supportive and loving and a good ally by supporting medical and surgical transition for kids, your heart may be in the right place, but you're wrong. And someone replied to me, this is for people who do already agree with us. This is where I think sometimes people can be misguided. Someone replied and said, this is who said, how can anyone cut off the healthy breasts of a girl and have his heart in the right place? And so then we started going back and forth. And I was like, because I think they really do. These people really do think they're doing the right thing. Just like you think you're right. They think they're being supportive of kids. They've either convinced themselves or they've allowed themselves to be convinced. I mean, look at all the manipulative Orwellian language, gender affirming care. They don't even call it what it is. Gender affirming care for kids. So a lot of these people they do have their heart in the right place. And they do believe they do. So you're not going to reach them by simply telling them this is evil, which I think it is, but you're not going to reach them that way. You can tell them it's evil, but you have to do so with while also understanding them and understanding where they're coming from and why they don't think it's evil, why they can't see it as evil yet. And so I was discussing this with this person, and they said, that's the fallacy. You'll never persuade them. That's bullshit. I'm here to tell you that is bullshit, and you have a losing outlook on life, and maybe you've never persuaded anyone, but I have. So I know it's bullshit. There are people in our audience who I've persuaded. There are people in my real life who I've persuaded. And the rare, beautiful occasions when that happens, it's never happened as a result of me simply rebuking them or telling them it's evil or talking down to them or judging them or coming in with an attitude that like they can't be convinced. I was convinced after 20 years in social justice. I came out of it. I know a ton of people now who've come out of it. Dr. Joel Brown, who I interviewed a couple weeks ago, he came out of it. Gracie West, Embarrassing Mom, she came out of it. People can leave this ideology. And maybe you're not maybe you're not good with people. I have met some people who are on the kind of libertarian ANCAP area who are just very like arrogant and morally like judgmental, and they seem content to just yell at and preach at the people who already agree with them. That's not for me. Go do that. And if you do that and you spend your life doing that, but I can understand why you think that people won't be persuaded, because you're not persuading anyone. Like, go be angry and over there. But yeah, that's just a point to say, look, people can change their minds, and I think people are going to change their mind on this, and it's better to be early, and so we can get this turned around in the States rather than late, and rather than like one of those people who's a few decades from now looking back, and I can imagine some people looking back and trying to downplay their part in it, or their silence about it, or their support of it, because I think history is going to come around, and we are going to we are going to say this is disgusting what we're allowing the medical establishment and parents to do to children. Already in Switzerland, I think it's Switzerland or Sweden, Switzerland and Finland, they've already said, look, we're not going to do this stuff on kids. You have to be 18. You have to be old enough to consent. We're not going to give sterilizing hormones to children. We're not going to cut off their body parts. Okay. Switzerland, Finland, and the UK, says Adrian. Yes. Yeah, Andrew says most people are well-intentioned if extremely deluded. Yes, I think so too. Okay, so here we go. Let's put this up on the screen. This is I think it's Billboard Chris was talking about how important this is. He's totally right. This is one of the most important pieces, I think, to come out on this issue so far, because this is someone who's in it and was participating in it, who is queer herself, who has a trans husband, who's a part of the left, who's been pushing it for all this time and is now saying, I was wrong. So this is in the Free Press. Here's a picture of her. Her name is Jamie Reed. Headline, I thought I was saving trans kids. Now I'm blowing the whistle. Subtitle, there are more than 100 pediatric gender clinics across the U.S. I worked at one. What's happening to children is morally and medically appalling. By the way, more than 100 pediatric gender clinics, that's new. That's in the past few years. It's been an explosion. That hasn't always been the case. There hasn't always been this demand from little kids. Okay. Let's just read through this. I am a 42-year-old St. Louis native, a queer woman, and politically to the left of Bernie Sanders. My worldview has deeply shaped my career. I have spent my professional life providing counseling to vulnerable populations, children in foster care, sexual minorities, and the poor. For almost 4 years, I worked at the Washington University School of Medicine Division of Infectious Diseases with teens and young adults who were HIV positive. Many of them were trans or otherwise gender nonconforming, and I could relate. Through childhood and adolescence, I did a lot of gender questioning myself. I'm now married to a trans man. So she's married to a biological woman who has transitioned to live as a man. I'm now married to a trans man, and together we are raising my 2 biological children from a previous marriage and 3 foster children we hope to adopt. All that led me to a job in 2018 as a case manager at the Washington University Transgender Center at St. Louis Children's Hospital, which had been established a year earlier. See, 2017. That's around the time all these gender clinics for kids started popping up. The center's working assumption was that the earlier you treat kids with gender dysphoria, the more anguish you can prevent later on. This premise was shared by the center's doctors and therapists. Given their expertise, I assumed that an abundant evidence backed this consensus. Spoiler alert, it doesn't. If you're watching this, if you're on the left, if you think, oh, look, but don't studies say that this is good for kids, that we should transition them if they have any questions about their gender, if they think, that we should transition them earlier. No, there's no evidence for this. We are currently, we've been experimenting on kids for the past few years. So we have to wait. We have to wait and see what's going to happen to them. And we're already seeing some of the horrible results. During the 4 years I worked at the clinic as a case manager, I was responsible for patient intake and oversight. Around 1,000 distressed young people came through our doors. The majority of them received hormone prescriptions that can have life-altering consequences, including sterility. Now, those people who are out there like evangelists pushing this, the ones who are not, that you can't convince, right? You can't reach them. Those people, the very loudmouth ones who are pushing this ideology and are doing the brainwashing of otherwise good-intentioned adults and parents, they will downplay this. They downplay it all the time. They do not like this fact. But you will notice in the documents that they have these kids and their parents sign, it tells them It tells them these hormones, these puberty blockers can possibly make you sterile. They have to sign that in the consent forms. They know this, but they will try to downplay that. And if you're on the left and you're thinking this is about helping trans kids, I'll just ask you, like, what do you think consent means? Like, at what age is a person able to, like, cognitively, to understand the lifelong choice that they're making and to consent to something? In this society, we've decided, okay, people may disagree on the age at which that happens, but we are going to come together collectively because we have to make a law to protect children when it comes to consent for sex, right? So we're going to make these laws and we're going to say, okay, you have to be 18. Otherwise, it's an adult taking advantage of a kid. You can't consent. So as a society, we say, look, kids have to be a certain age. You have to be an adult in order to be able to consent to have sex, to drink alcohol, to smoke cigarettes, to buy a gun, to drive a car, to vote, to get a tattoo. You have to be a certain age. So why would we as a society say, well, but deciding that you're going to sterilize yourself, you're going to take some puberty blockers and other hormones that might mean that you can never have kids, that you're sterilizing yourself. Yeah, as a kid, you could make that decision. Why would we do that? Do you really think kids are capable of making that decision? No. I don't think you honestly do. Deep down. Okay. I'm going to continue. Let's see. Okay, we're continuing with this article from Jamie Reed, the whistleblower. I left the clinic in November of last year because I could no longer participate in what was happening there. By the time I departed, I was certain that the way the American medical system is treating these patients is the opposite of the promise we make to do no harm. Instead, we are permanently harming the vulnerable patients in our care. Children, she's talking about children. Today, I'm speaking out. I'm doing so knowing how toxic the public conversation is around this highly contentious issue and the ways that my testimony might be misused. I'm also doing so knowing that I'm putting myself at serious personal and professional risk. Why do you think that might be? Why would you be at personal and professional risk for being a whistleblower on this subject and talking about what you witnessed? Could it be because it's cult-like, that the ideology that's pushing, transitioning kids has become very cult-like an orthodoxy where you can't question it without being called a bigot or a homophobe or a transphobe, even if you're a queer woman like Jamie who's married to a trans man? Almost everyone in my life advised me to keep my head down, but I cannot in good conscience do so because what is happening to scores of children is far more important than my comfort, and what is happening to them is morally and medically appalling. I love this woman. I just love her. Soon after my arrival at the Transgender Center, I was struck by the lack of formal protocols for treatment. The center's physician co-directors were essentially the sole authority. At first, the patient population was tipped toward what used to be the traditional instance of a child with gender dysphoria, a boy. And if you go back and look at the data, this is absolutely true. And maybe you're on the left, you've never even looked at the data. It used to be a boy, as she says, often quite young, who wanted to present as or who wanted to be a girl. Until 2015 or so, a very small number of these boys comprised the population of pediatric gender dysphoria cases. Very small. I think the stats I've read, it's less than 1% of the population historically. And they've mostly been very young boys, like toddlers. Then, across the Western world, there began to be a dramatic increase in a new population, teenage girls, many with no previous history of gender distress, suddenly declaring they were transgender and demanding immediate treatment with testosterone. I certainly saw this at the center. One of my jobs was to do intake for new patients and their families. When I started, there were probably 10 such calls a month. When I left, there were 50, and about 70% of the new patients were girls. Sometimes clusters of girls arrived from the same high school. If you're a parent and you've got kids in the public school, you're probably already aware of this. I can't tell you how many parents I've talked to who said online and in real life who said, this is my child is having questions about their gender, their sex, they might be trans, and so are all their friends. And there's several in the same class. This concerned me, but I didn't feel I was in the position to sound some kind of alarm back then. There was a team of about 8 of us, and only one other person brought up the kinds of questions I had. Anyone who raised doubts ran the risk of being called a transphobe, like a cult. Like a cult, like Scientology, where they have what do they call you if you start to question? They have names. They have names because you're a heretic now. You're an apostate now. You're not one of us anymore. This is what keeps adults silent. I mean, it's the same thing. It's so crazy that we can reach adulthood and still be controlled by the fear of what our peers think, like in middle school. But that's like fear of social repercussions. I mean, it's huge. And maybe you're someone listening to this who, like, you let it control you. You're afraid of what people will think. You're afraid, well, if I say that I think adults should be able to do what they want, and I'm not a transphobe, but I think that, we shouldn't be doing this to children. We shouldn't be surgically and medically altering children before they're old enough to consent. Well, I'm afraid my friends or my peers, my colleagues will think I'm transphobic. Well, who cares? If it's not true, it's not true. I hope you can get to the place that Jamie's at. Okay. The girls who came to us had many comorbidities: depression, anxiety, ADHD, eating disorders, obesity. Many were diagnosed with autism or had autism-like symptoms. A report last year on a British pediatric transgender center found that about 1/3 of the patients referred there were on the autism spectrum. Now, I'm in some of these groups on Facebook they're called like parents of trans kids, and there's tens of thousands of people in these groups. And they come there looking for help, and if they don't immediately conform to the cult, to the orthodoxy, they're booted out. They're called names. If they don't immediately get on board with the whole cult system of, okay, you need to immediately validate this kid. You need to go with whatever pronouns they're using. You need to dress them however they want. And you need to start looking into puberty blockers. You need to start looking into hormones, and then down the road, surgery. If they don't do that, they get kicked out. So I'm in these groups, and it's always interesting to see when they start noticing something, these parents of so-called trans kids. And some of them started to notice that there's a lot of autistic kids who are suddenly saying they're trans. And instead of stopping like a rational adult would do and questioning, well, like a scientist would do, like someone who believes in science, by the way, stopping and saying, well, hey, maybe what's going on here? Could it be that autistic kids are more susceptible to thinking that this might be something they're dealing with? Could it be that they're more susceptible to all the messaging that they're getting about maybe you might be born in the wrong body? 20, 30 years ago, kids, we were not getting this messaging. Whether we were autistic or not, kids were not getting this messaging. As I mentioned, there was like less than 1% of the population dealt with gender dysphoria. It was mostly young boys, toddlers. It wasn't something that was presented to children like it is today in kindergarten. 100% of kids now, pretty much, if they're in public school, they're getting the messaging from society, from their school, from their peers, from Tumblr, from online. pop culture, everyone is messaging these kids and saying, hey, you might have gender dysphoria. You might be born in the wrong body. You need to figure out if you are. That's not true. Why are we introducing that to 100% of kids? This mental illness, it is a mental illness, gender dysphoria. Why are we saying you might have this? You need to consider it. And maybe there's something about kids on the autism spectrum that makes them more susceptible to falling for that. But instead of looking at that and saying, hey, what's going on here? These parents and these cultish, like parents of trans kid groups, they look at that and they say, oh, well, it must be just a thing. Like if you're autistic, you're probably also trans. They say they really believe this. Like, well, autistic people, they're more likely to be born in the wrong body. What? I'm gonna take a second. I'm gonna take a second and see what you guys, if I'm missing anything in the chat. I'm a little wound up about this, but I think I'm pretty calm right now. I hope that's apparent that I'm trying to stay calm. Okay. Let's continue. Frequently, our patients declared that they had disorders that no one believed they had. Now, again, when she says patients, she's talking about kids. We had patients who said they had Tourette syndrome, but they didn't. That they had tic disorders, but they didn't. That they had multiple personalities, but they didn't. If you're a parent with kids in the public schools, you may have also already heard about this. This is the new trend. It's not just like kids now coming home and saying, oh, I'm trans, my friends are trans, we're all trans. Now they're saying, I have DID, dissociative identity disorder. It used to be called multiple personality disorder. They're coming home and they're saying, like, I think I have multiple personality. No. And the reason I'm laughing is because we're in such an absurd place where the medical establishment is now like, maybe you do. Like, yes, let's immediately get you on medicine for this, right? Oh my gosh. It used to be that the doctors would talk to these children, that like fraction of a percent of kids who dealt with gender dysphoria back before it was mainstream and popular and being pushed on children. It used to be that doctors would try and go through, with the children and with adults who had gender dysphoria, they would try and go through all the other comorbidities and try and figure out if there was something else causing the person to feel this way, to feel that they were born in the wrong body. They would, if they had anxiety, if they had depression, if they had some of these people have personality disorders. Borderline personality disorder, for example, is a person who doesn't have a stable sense of identity. And I've seen multiple detransitioners now, young adults who were transitioned, who lost their body parts, who were sterilized when they were kids, who are now coming out and saying, I was fooled, I made a mistake. The medical industry did this to me. No one protected me. The doctors didn't protect me from myself. My parents didn't protect me from myself. And by the way, the doctors knew. They're saying the doctors knew that they had borderline, or that they had anxiety, or that they were depressed, or they had these other issues. And they didn't work to figure out what was going on. They just immediately said, yep, that's it. You must be born in the wrong body. Let's lop those breasts off. The doctors privately recognize these false self-diagnoses as a manifestation of social contagion. They even acknowledge that suicide has an element of social contagion. But when I said that the clusters of girls streaming into our service looked as if their gender issues might be a manifestation of social contagion, the doctors said that gender identity reflected something innate. To begin transitioning, the girls needed a letter of support from a therapist, usually one that we recommended, who they had to see only once or twice for the green light. To make it more efficient for the therapist, we offered them a template for how to write a letter in support of transition. They gave the therapist. So the kid comes in, I think I'm trans. The Center for Transgender Kids, in quotes, at this children's hospital goes, okay, well, you need, in order to do this, we need a letter of support from a therapist. Here, go to this therapist that we've selected, who we've provided a letter to write for you to give back to us. We wrote the letter the therapist is going to give back to us, recommending it. Does that sound? To make it more efficient for therapists, we offered to write a template for how to write a letter in support of transition. The next stop was a single visit to the endocrinologist for a testosterone prescription. That's all it took. When a female takes testosterone, the profound and permanent effects of the hormone can be seen in a matter of months. Voices drop, beards sprout, body fat is redistributed, sexual interest explodes, aggression increases, and mood can be unpredictable. Our patients were told about some side effects, including sterility. But after working at the center, I came to believe that teenagers are simply not capable of fully grasping what it means to make the decision to become infertile while still a minor. Many encounters with patients emphasized to me how little these young people understood the profound impacts changing gender would have on their bodies and minds. But the center downplayed the negative consequences and emphasized the need for transition. As the center's website said, quote, left untreated, gender dysphoria has any number of consequences from self-harm to suicide. But when you take away the gender dysphoria by allowing a child to be who he or she is, we're noticing that goes away. The studies we have show these kids often wind up functioning psychosocially as well or better than their peers, end quote. So then Jamie points out there are no reliable studies showing this. So they have a lie. This is a lie. And again, we know it's a lie because they've only been doing this for a short amount of time on children. There are no longitudinal studies. There are no reliable studies showing this. Indeed, the experiences of many of the center's patients prove how false these assertions are. Here's an example. On Friday, May 1st, 2020, a colleague emailed me about a 15-year-old male patient. Quote, oh dear, I am concerned that the patient does not understand what biclotamide does. I don't know what that drug. I don't know. I've never heard of that one before, but let's move on. I responded, I don't think that we start anything honestly right now. And so you can see this email here where Jamie's colleague said, oh dear, I'm concerned that so-and-so does not understand what this drug does. It's not just a blocker. It will cause breast development. The family seems certain that was their first choice of therapy to start with. The statement made in the letter that, quote, at times it seems scary, so she wants to move slowly, but eventually sees herself as being on estrogen, end quote, is concerning. And they wrote the name at the end, what do we do now? And so Jamie said, I don't think that we start anything, honestly, right now. I think that this is a letter saying, wait more time. And yes, I think that so-and-so does not understand what this drug does. Biclotamide is a medication used to treat metastatic prostate cancer, and one of its side effects is that it feminizes the bodies of men who take it, including the appearance of breasts. The center prescribed this cancer drug as a puberty blocker and feminizing agent for boys. As with most cancer drugs, this one has a long list of side effects, and this patient experienced one of them, liver toxicity. He was sent to another unit of the hospital for evaluation and immediately taken off the drug. Liver toxicity. Afterward, his mother sent an electronic message to the transgender center saying that we were lucky her family was not the type to sue. Now, a note about this parent. I'm not saying she's wrong. I think she does have a right to sue because the medical establishment is failing these children and failing their parents. She absolutely has a right to sue. But as a parent, she also failed her kid. You failed your child. You did. I know that's hard to hear, but you did. How little patients understood what they were getting into was illustrated by a call that we received at the center in 2020 from a 17-year-old biological female patient who was on testosterone. She said she was bleeding from the vagina. In less than an hour, she had soaked through an extra heavy pad, her jeans, and a towel she had wrapped around her waist. The nurse at the center told her to go to the emergency room right away. We later found out this girl had had intercourse, and because testosterone thins the vaginal tissues, her vaginal canal had ripped open. She had to be sedated and given surgery to repair the damage. She wasn't the only vaginal laceration case we heard about. Other girls were disturbed by the effects of testosterone on their clitoris, which enlarges and grows into what looks like a microphallus or a tiny penis. I counseled one patient whose enlarged clitoris now extended below her vulva, and it chafed and rubbed painfully in her jeans. I advised her to get the kind of compression undergarments worn by biological men who dress to pass as female. At the end of the call, I thought to myself, wow, we hurt this kid. There are rare conditions in which babies are born with atypical genitalia, cases that call for sophisticated care and compassion. But clinics like the one where I worked are creating a whole cohort of kids with atypical genitals, and most of these teenagers have not even had sex yet. They had no idea who they were going to be as adults. Yet all it took for them to permanently transform themselves was one or two short conversations with a therapist, the therapist that the trans center picked. Being put on powerful doses of testosterone or estrogen, enough to try to trick your body into mimicking the opposite sex, affects the rest of the body. I doubt that any parent who's ever consented to give their kid testosterone, a lifelong treatment, knows that they're also possibly signing their kid up for blood pressure medication, cholesterol medication, and perhaps sleep apnea and diabetes. But sometimes the parents' understanding of what they had agreed to do to their children came forcefully. And so then she includes this email from a parent that says, please be advised that I am revoking my consent for this course of medical treatment. Grades have dropped. There's been an inpatient behavioral health visit, and now he's on 5 different medications: Lexapro, Trazodone, Buspar, etc. My child is a shell of his former self, riddled with anxiety. Who knows if it's because of the hormone blockers, the other medications? I revoke my consent. I want the hormone blocker removed. Thank you. Better late than never, parent. Besides teenage girls, another new group was referred to us: young people from the inpatient psychiatric unit or the emergency department of St. Louis Children's Hospital. The mental health of these kids was deeply concerning. There were diagnoses like schizophrenia, PTSD, bipolar disorder, and more. Often they were already on a fistful of pharmaceuticals. This was tragic but unsurprising given the profound trauma some had been through. Yet, no matter how much suffering or pain a child had endured or how little treatment and love they had received, our doctors viewed gender transition, even with all the expense and hardship it entailed, as the solution. Some weeks it felt as though almost our entire caseload was nothing but disturbed young people. For example, one teenager came to us in the summer of 2022 when he was 17 years old and living in a lockdown facility because he had been sexually abusing dogs. He'd had an awful childhood. His mother was a drug addict, his father was imprisoned, and he grew up in foster care. Whatever treatment he may have been getting, it wasn't working. During our intake, I learned from another caseworker that when he got out, he planned to reoffend because he believed that the dogs had willingly submitted. Somewhere along the way, he expressed a desire to become female, so he ended up being seen at our center. From there, he went to a psychologist at the hospital who was known to approve virtually everyone seeking transition. Then our doctor recommended feminizing hormones. At the time, I wondered if this was being done as a form of chemical castration. That same thought came up again with another case. This one was in the spring of 2022 and concerned a young man who had intense obsessive compulsive disorder that manifested as a desire to cut off his penis after he masturbated. This patient expressed no gender dysphoria, but he got hormones too. I asked the doctor what protocol he was following, but I never got a straight answer. Sorry, I just have to take a break. We're reading this article, this whistleblower article at Free Press by Jamie Reed, who is a person who's on the left, describes herself as being to the left of Bernie Sanders, who's a queer woman, who's married to a trans man. and she is now blowing the whistle on her time spent as a manager in a transgender center at a children's hospital and all of the incredible harm that she saw done to children by the medical establishment and by their parents. It's hard to read all of this without taking a break because you're just like that part there about the disturbed kids. I don't know why this isn't. Yes, it's difficult to hear. Yes. I don't know why this isn't obvious. This is the kind of stuff that the mainstream news, this should be front page. This is what the establishment, if it had any legitimacy left, would be talking about. This is what the politicians, no matter what party they're in, would be talking about. But instead, they're pushing this stuff and they're completely ignoring what's really happening, the reality. The Shagsworth says, do you have a link to this article? Yes. I shared it with the tweet about today's stream, and I'm going to post it right here. I'll also put it in the description of the video. Everyone should read this piece. This woman, she's right. She's incredibly brave. All of her friends and family told her not to come forward. She's a leftist. She's queer. She's married to a trans man. You know why they told her not to come forward. Everyone's going to think you're awful. They're going to think you became a bigot now, which is so stupid. It's like, no. If you are afraid of your friends and family thinking that you have now become transphobic, even though you're married to a trans person and you're queer, you might be in a cult. You might be in a cult. Thank you. The Shagsworth is here. Thank you for becoming a member. Awesome. Good to see you. I want to talk to you again soon. I want to have you on this channel. Nothing witty. Thank you for the $50 super chat. Thank you, Carrie, for consistently speaking about this issue. My daughter has been sucked into this social contagion. She's 18 now, and legally, if she decides to look for this treatment, there's not much we can do besides plead with her. I'm horrified. I'm so sorry. I don't really have anything to say right now. I'm just really sorry. There are so many parents who are dealing with this now, and I think finding out a little too late, maybe, that everything that has been happening at the public schools. I know some parents who, when they figured it out, maybe a little late, but they got their kids out. I'm thinking of one family in particular, and their kids are doing so much better just a couple short years later. There's a lot of resistance at first if you're going to pull your kids out of these public schools. There's a lot of resistance because they're already in these social groups where everyone's like picking up this stuff and learning about BLM and how to be a good ally and divest yourself of white privilege, and maybe also you're trans and you need to go on medication, and it's all connected. All of the social justice stuff, the race, gender, sexuality, it's all connected. And when you pull your kid out of that, there's going to be resistance at first, of course, especially if they're a teenager. So like, you're pulling me away from my friends. You don't understand, mom and dad, you're bigoted, you're this, you're that. But anecdotally, the parents I know who've done it do not regret it. And their kids are doing much better a couple years later. I wish you, I will say a prayer for you. That's all I have to offer about because as you mentioned, your kid is now 18. They can choose this. I know you didn't ask me for advice, but what I would say is just tell them what you think. Tell them the truth, that you think this is going to hurt them, but speak it with love and care without pushing them away. And I think that's hard to do. I talked to a guy once who sent me an email about how he got pulled into woke stuff in college. And he went through a period of several years where he hated his dad. He called his dad, and I understand this. I went through this too. I went through it way earlier, 20 years ago, but he went into this period where he hated his dad. He called him white supremacist. His dad was a part of the patriarchy. His dad was transphobic, all these things. And he said, the one thing that mattered was that, he was like, I couldn't understand was that my dad loved me throughout all of it. He disagreed with me. He wasn't afraid to disagree with me, but he didn't reject me. Even though I rejected him, he didn't reject me. And he's like, years later, when I started questioning all of it, I remembered that. I remembered the way my dad treated me. So maybe that guy's story would help you with your child, your adult child. Okay, let's continue. We're going to get back into this article. You guys, this is the whistleblower, Jamie Reed, who worked for years at a transgender clinic at a children's hospital as the manager, and has now come out as a whistleblower and is exposing everything they're doing to children, and doing so as a person on the left who herself describes herself as a queer woman who's married to a trans man who is to the left of Bernie Sanders, as she describes herself. She's saying, this is wrong. I thought I was helping trans kids, but I was wrong. And so we're reading through this article in the hopes that people on the left will read it, will listen to it, and keep an open mind, even if they think what they're doing, even if you think what you're doing is helping kids, helping trans kids, keep an open mind and read this woman's story. Okay, we're going to continue. She says another disturbing aspect of the center was its lack of regard for the rights of parents and the extent to which doctors saw themselves as more informed decision makers over the fate of these children. In Missouri, only one parent's consent is required for treatment of their child. But when there was a dispute between parents, it seemed that the center always took the side of the affirming parent. My concerns about this approach to dissenting parents grew in 2019 when one of our doctors actually testified in a custody hearing against a father who opposed a mother's wish to start their 11-year-old daughter on puberty blockers. I had done the original intake call and I found the mother quite disturbing. She and the father were getting divorced, and the mother described the daughter as, quote, kind of a tomboy. So now the mother was convinced her child was trans. But when I asked if her daughter had adopted a boy's name, if she was distressed about her body, if she was saying she felt like a boy, the mother said no. I explained that the girl just didn't meet the criteria for an evaluation. Then a month later, the mother called back and said her daughter now used a boy's name and was in distress over her body and wanted to transition. This time, the mom and daughter were given an appointment. Our providers decided the girl was trans and prescribed a puberty blocker to prevent her normal development. They're talking an 11-year-old. The father adamantly disagreed, said this was all coming from the mother, and a custody battle ensued. After the hearing where our doctor testified in favor of transition, the judge sided with the mother. This is also anecdotal. I'm going to tell you this. In these parents groups for trans kids, where there's tens of thousands of members and it's like a cult, and that you get kicked out if you don't immediately go along with the orthodoxy of like validate, confirm, get them on drugs, do the surgery. If you don't immediately do all of that, they boot you. This group is mostly women. It's a lot of single moms. It's a lot of divorced moms. It's a lot of moms who themselves have now transitioned. So trans men. It's a lot of queer women who describe themselves as queer moms. But mostly what I've noticed in there is this what this Jamie is describing here that she saw with this mother. This is not uncommon. It's a little bit like, I know people have described it as Munchausen's by proxy. It's these mothers who are getting attention and validation from having a trans kid, from having a kid that's like different and special. And now they're a member of this oppressed minority, and look how supportive they are. It's like, your kid is now a superhero according to this cultural religion, according to where we're at in history now. You've got a medal. They make being a parent, being a mom of a trans kid, their entire identity. If you go to their Facebook pages, it's in their profile picture. It's in their banner. Proud mom of a trans kid. Like, that is their identity now. God forbid if any of these kids, and some of them have, I've seen the stories unfold where the kids decide, I was wrong. I'm gonna detransition now. The parents, these kind of moms, they're devastated. They fight it. They take their kids to therapists who fight it, who try and convince the kid that, "No, yeah, you no, you don't wanna go back to your biological, you are trans, don't, this is the mental illness." Now, see how upside down and backwards that is? This is the mental illness, you being a girl and thinking you are a girl. And I've seen moms in these groups do this exact same thing, where they'll come in and they'll say, um, "My son," so they mean daughter, they mean a biological girl. "My son is trans. I've always known to, but, he doesn't use a boy's name, and he still wants to wear dresses, and I'm just trying to figure out, like, how I can convince him." Like, they come in and ask for help from the others on how to, like, push their kid further into gender dysphoria. And I've seen others come in there and say, "My child doesn't have gender dysphoria, but you don't have to have gender dysphoria to be trans." They say this now. So wait a minute, you don't have to believe that you were born in the wrong body or to experience a problem with your body to medically and surgically transition to be the opposite sex? What? They're trying to separate being trans from gender dysphoria itself. It's crazy. Okay, so back to this article. Here's an email that Jamie sent requesting guidance. "Thanks. I was not having any issue with interpreting or understanding the elements that she commented on below. I was looking at the bigger question and how consent is now being determined. My concerns are that the judge is essentially removing the element of parental consent and placing it in our hands. The judge could have awarded the medical decision making to the dad or awarded the legal custody to the dad. Instead, the judge put the center's hands, the decision making in the center's hands, the decision making for medical transition. And this is a patient who is not even 16 yet. Because I was the main intake person, I had the broadest perspective on our existing and prospective patients. In 2019, a new group of people appeared on my radar: desisters and detransitioners. The number of detransitioners is exploding, which makes sense because the number of kids transitioning is exploding. Okay. So a few years ago, you would go on YouTube and you could go down rabbit holes of these videos, mostly girls, mostly that first group of people Jamie talked about, that what's called late onset gender dysphoria, these teenage girls who are coming in clusters, all from the same class in school. Oh, and they're all deciding as teenagers that they're trans. A lot of those girls end up detransitioning. And a few years ago, you could go on YouTube and see all these videos. And now the number of those videos, there's so many of them trying to speak, trying to get people to listen to them. A lot of them are young adults now. There's so many of them, it's hard for me to find the ones I was looking for today's video. There was one I watched recently of a girl, a young adult now. She's crying. She's talking about how she was already previously diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. The doctors knew she had an unstable sense of identity, how they rushed her into transition, how she regrets that, before she was an adult, she was allowed to consent. You can't consent at that age to have her breast chopped off. She'll never have her breasts back. She'll never breastfeed. She's not sure if she's going to be able to have children. And she has a host of other permanent medical issues that are going to follow her throughout life now. And there are tons of these videos. And if you talk to anyone in the trans cult, I don't mean trans people when I say that. There's a lot of trans people who hate what is happening to children in the names of trans ideology. There's a lot of them who hate it. When I say trans cult, I mean all the people, most of whom are not trans, the moms and the medical establishment, all the people who are pushing trans ideology on kids. The trans cult does not want to look at the stories of detransitioners, and they will poo-poo it. They will put these kids on a pedestal and make them superheroes when they're in the middle of transitioning, when they're transitioning. But if they say, "I regret it, I regret what society let me do to myself when I was a minor. I regret what my parents let me do, what the medical establishment let me do that I couldn't consider. They will shame these people, these kids that they used to put on a pedestal. They'll shame them, they'll ignore them, they pretend like they don't exist. If you try to share a story of a detransitioner in one of these parents for trans kid groups, like, hey, like maybe as a parent who's making this decision, who's being faced with this issue with your child, maybe you would want to see some kids who transitioned and then regretted it now as adults, and there's a ton of them. Maybe we should, I want to put this link in this group and see, let's talk about it. They will delete it. You don't share stories of detransitioners in these parents of trans kid groups. It's kind of crazy, right? Why would you want to see the potential negative outcomes of pursuing this for your child? I don't know, kind of speechless. Okay. So in 2019, a new group of people appeared on my radar, desisters and detransitioners. Desisters choose not to go through with a transition. Detransitioners are transgender people who decide to return to their birth gender. The one colleague with whom I was able to share my concerns agreed with me that we should be tracking desistance and detransition. We thought the doctors would want to collect and understand this data in order to figure out what they had missed, right? We were wrong. It's it's exactly like in those groups, those parents groups for trans kid groups. They don't want to know. They don't want to track the numbers of kids who are detransitioning. They don't want you to share the stories. They will shit all over those kids. They will ignore them. They will say they don't exist, that there's just a handful here. There's tons of them. And they don't even want to track. They don't want to know how many they are. She's like, we thought the doctors would want to collect and understand this data in order to figure out what they had missed. We were wrong. One doctor wondered aloud why he would spend his time on someone who's no longer his patient. But we created a document anyway, and we called it the red flag list. It was an Excel spreadsheet that tracked the kind of patients that kept my colleague and me up at night. One of the saddest cases of detransition I witnessed was a teenage girl who, like so many of our patients, came from an unstable family, was in an uncertain living situation, and had a history of drug use. The overwhelming majority of our patients are white, but this girl was Black. She was put on hormones at the center when she was around 16. When she was 18, she went in for a double mastectomy, what's known as top surgery. 3 months later, she called the surgeon's office to say she was going back to her birth name and that her pronouns were she and her. Heartbreakingly, she told the nurse, quote, "I want my breast back." I'm telling you, if you watch these videos, you will see these young adults saying stuff like this, like tearfully saying, pleading for the medical establishment and the politicians and the parents to listen to them. And they're totally ignored. Sorry. She says, "I want my breast back." The surgeon's office contacted our office because they didn't know what to say to this girl. My colleague and I said that we would reach out. It took a while to track her down. And when we did, we made sure that she was in decent mental health and that she was not actively suicidal and that she was not using substances. The last I heard, she was pregnant. Of course, she'll never be able to breastfeed her child. My concerns about what was going on at the center started to overtake my life. By spring of 2020, I felt a medical and moral obligation to do something. So I spoke up in the office and I sent plenty of emails. Here's just one example. On January 6, 2022, I received an email from a staff therapist asking me for help with a case of a 16-year-old transgender male living in another state. Quote, "Parents are open to having patient see a therapist, but are not supportive of gender, and patient does not want parents to be aware of gender identity. I am having a challenging time finding a gender-affirming therapist," end quote. I replied, quote, "I do not ethically agree with linking a minor patient to a therapist who would be gender affirming with gender as a focus of their work without that being discussed with the parents and the parent agreeing to that kind of care," end quote. In all my years at the Washington University School of Medicine, I had received solidly positive performance reviews. But in 2021, that changed. I got a below average mark for my, quote, judgment and working relationships cooperative spirit, end quote. Although I was described as, quote, responsible, conscientious, hardworking, and productive, end quote, the evaluation also noted, quote, at times, Jamie responds poorly to direction from management with defensiveness and hostility, end quote. Wow. Why do you think she might be defensive and hostile, seeing that nobody at this trans clinic for children wants to look at any of the data about the kids they made mistakes with, the kids who are detransitioning? Things came to a head at a half-day retreat in the summer of 2022. In front of the team, the doctor said that my colleague and I had to stop questioning the medicine and the science. It's in quotes. They're not doing medicine and science. Science is asking questions in pursuit of truth. They're not doing that. They're doing cult. They're doing cult experiments on children. This is not science. I had to stop questioning, quote, the medicine and science, as well as their authority. Then an administrator told us that we had to, quote, get on board or get out. It's just like those Facebook groups for parents of trans kids. Get on board or get out. It became clear that the purpose of the retreat was to deliver these messages to us. The Washington University system provides a generous college tuition payment program for longstanding employees. I live by my paycheck, and I have no money to put aside for 5 college tuitions for my kids. I had to keep my job. I also feel a lot of loyalty to Washington University, but I decided then and there that I had to get out of the transgender center, and to do so, I had to keep my head down and improve my next performance review. I managed to get a decent evaluation, and I landed a job conducting research in another part of the Washington University School of Medicine. I gave my notice, and I left the Transgender Center in November of 2022. Do you guys understand? She's like putting her current job in jeopardy to come forward and tell this story. That's what she meant at the beginning, you know? Like all of her friends and family are like, don't do this. She has 5 kids that she wants to put through college. Like she wants to keep her job, obviously, but she thinks this is much more important. And it is. Here's the end. For a couple weeks, I tried to put everything behind me and settled into my new job as a clinical research coordinator, managing studies regarding children undergoing bone marrow transplants. Then I came across comments from Dr. Rachel Levine, a transgender woman who is a high official at the Federal Department of Health and Human Services. You guys have seen that clown show, right? Dr. Rachel Levine. The article read, Levine, the U.S. Assistant Secretary for Health, said that clinics are proceeding carefully and that no American children are receiving drugs or hormones for gender dysphoria who shouldn't be. What? You notice that little bit on the end there? This is the language of an abuser and a manipulator. This is the language of a narcissist and a psychopath. What they are doing, this whole sentence here, look at this. No American children are receiving drugs or hormones for gender dysphoria, comma, who shouldn't be. Oh, so they are receiving it, but someone is deciding that they should be. Okay, as long as you guys are deciding they should be. So they are receiving it, but someone's deciding they should be. Oh, okay. This is so manipulative. I felt stunned and sickened. It wasn't true. And I know that from deep firsthand experience. So I started writing down everything I could about my experience at the Transgender Center. 2 weeks ago, I brought my concerns and documents to the attention of Missouri's Attorney General. He is a Republican. I am a progressive. But the safety of children should not be a matter for our culture wars. Given the secrecy and lack of rigorous standards that characterize youth gender transition across the country, I believe that to ensure the safety of American children, we need a moratorium on the hormonal and surgical treatment of young people with gender dysphoria. She is right. This is not a left-right thing. This is not a conservative liberal thing. I am a liberal. I'm a conservative on some things. I'm a liberal on others. I'm more conservative on some personal things. I'm more liberal on some policy things. on this is not a left right thing. And if you're on the left and you're watching this and you think it is, like, why do you think that? Is children consenting for sex, is that a left right thing? It hasn't been made one. That's why you don't think of that as a left right thing. This has been made a left right thing to trick you, to brainwash you, to go along with this ideology that says this is good for children. We should sterilize them and chop off their body parts before they're 18 and old enough to understand what they're consenting to. They've tied it to left and right. Do you understand? So that you are so afraid of being perceived as being on the right that you'll stay over here, even if you do start to have concerns and doubts and questions about like whether kids should be able to choose these things. They want that fear, you being afraid of being seen as a right winger, a conservative, that fear to keep you quiet about this. But don't let them. This is not a left-right thing. In the past 15 years, according to Reuters, the US has gone from having no pediatric gender clinics, this is what I was talking about at the beginning, to more than 100. We had 0 15 years ago. Now we have 100, more than 100. A thorough analysis should be undertaken to find out what has been done to their patients and why, and what the long-term consequences are. There's a clear path for us to follow. Just last year, England announced that it would close the Tavistock's Youth Gender Clinic, then the NHS's only such clinic in the country, after an investigation revealed shoddy practices and poor patient treatment. Sweden and Finland too. That's a correction. I said at the beginning Switzerland, it's Sweden. Sweden and Finland too have investigated pediatric transition and greatly curbed the practice, finding there is insufficient evidence of help and danger of great harm to kids. Some critics describe the kind of treatment offered at places like the Transgender Center where I worked as a kind of national experiment, but that's wrong because experiments are supposed to be carefully designed. Hypotheses are supposed to be tested ethically. The doctors I worked alongside at the Transgender Center said frequently about the treatment of our patients, quote, "We are building the plane while we are flying it. No one should be a passenger on that kind of aircraft." They're guinea pigs, these kids. So that's the piece. Thank you for sitting with me and reading through it. This is an article that came out today in the Free Press. It's a first-person account, a whistleblowing account from Jamie Reed, who, again, self-described as to the left of Bernie Sanders, a queer woman, married to a trans man, has spent her career working in transing kids, and is here to say, this is wrong. I was wrong. We need to look at what's happening. And it's not a left or right thing. I hope you'll share this article. I'm going to put the description, put the link in the description below. And if you're a person who likes to listen or read along with someone, I hope you will share this video for people who are similar to you. If there's someone in your life who doesn't understand you and they say to you the kind of things I hear once in a while, like, I don't get you. Like, I like you, but I don't get you. Are you like a transphobe? Maybe you'll share this article with them or share this video with them. And maybe this would be a good starting place, because I think this is the kind of story. This is the kind of story that I want to lift up, that the stories of people who are on the left who've said, wait a minute, who are questioning things, who are like, this is wrong. Those are the people that are more likely to sway the ones on the left who are the ones who are capable of being swayed. These stories, I think, are what will do it, these personal stories. So yes, Clever Invective, spread these stories. And thank God for Jamie Reed for coming forward. Shagsworth, yeah, this is a huge story. It needs to be covered. Yes. If we lived in a just society and our society wasn't upside down, this would be front page news everywhere in the US. But it's not. You'll see it on some podcasts that get called right wing, like mine, so that left people on the left don't watch, like, or they won't read it. she'll get called all kinds of names. They'll be like, "Oh, she got red Jamie Reed. Oh, she got red pilled. She became a troll. She is a right winger now. Like she's a transphobe now." I mean, they'll call her all the things that those of us who have woken up from the left have been called, and they'll do that so that people on the left won't listen to her. So if you like this piece, if you think what she did was brave, share it. I'll put the link below in the description. Thank you guys for hanging out. I know this is a little different kind of Kerfefe break today, but I wanted to just make it about this piece. I think it's so important. And here, I'll go through and see if there's any super chats or questions from people. What do we have starred? I'm getting a headache now. Reading that article gave me a headache. Okay, here we go. Frances Montgomery. What a famous name. Frances Montgomery for $5 says, Carrie, do you think that establishment will call the kids transing a right-wing talk stance later, like how most people think that the KKK was right-wing? Do you think they will call the kids transing a right-wing talk stance later? I'm not sure. No, I think what they'll do, if we move to the place where we should move, which is more like Sweden or Finland or the UK, where we ban this barbaric practice, we ban medical and surgical transitioning for children, for anyone under 18. If we do that, if we get to that place where we collectively say, no, this was wrong, what's going to happen is all the politicians and the celebrities and the parents and all of the people on the left who supported it and pushed it, they're going to start using the inclusive language of we to look back and say, well, we didn't know, kind of like they're doing now with the pandemic the past few years. And they say, ooh, well, we how could we have known XYZ? Well, you knew, and you were censoring people who were speaking against it, or you were smearing them or calling them anti-vax or, deplorables or whatever you were calling them. They're doing the same thing with this. But years from now, if we go to the place where we should as a society, they will look back and they will try to be like, well, we all were misguided, right? Like we thought we were doing the right thing for kids, right? Like that's what they'll do. They'll ignore the fact that they smeared and silenced and censored people who were trying to speak against it early on. Let's see. What else? I think, oh no, I clicked on the wrong button. I almost clicked out of here. Sorry, boomer moment. I saw Mr. Garcia here earlier. Anyway, I can't find it now. There's a lot of comments. Thank you guys. Thank you guys for being here. For such a serious topic. Again, I'm going to put it in the description, so share the article. So I'm going to take off. I hope you have a happy Friday. Just a couple of announcements. Tracy from Keto and Crimes, $20 super chat. Thank you, girl. She says, love you, girl. Well, right back at you. I want to talk to you again soon, too. I haven't talked to you in a while. Couple of announcements. So tomorrow, Saturday and Sunday, my husband and I are hosting our second and third house concert ever. And we're all sold out for the Saturday night show, but we still have a few tickets left for the Sunday matinee show. So if you would like to come on Sunday, if you're in the Georgetown, Texas area, email me at deprogrampod@gmail.com. We'll give you the ticket link. We don't post it publicly because it's our house. If you don't know what these are, my husband is an amazing musician. I know I'm biased, but you go check him out. I'm being straight up. And we've been putting together these concerts where he hires other musicians to come in and play with him, and they're all going to be different shows, different lineups. And so this one, he's got 3 friends, one friend from Germany who plays everything, pedal steel, violin, guitar. We've got 2 more violinists, viola, mandolin, and it's going to be great fun. And if you are coming, I know some people from Deprogrammed audience have already bought tickets, so I'm very excited to see you. And so that's happening this weekend. Again, if you want, there's still a few tickets for Sunday. So if you want tickets, email me at deprogrampod@gmail.com. And the other announcement is April 15th in Austin. I'll be hosting the minds.com event that's happening at the Vulcan. And it's going to be a great, I think it's going to be a great mix of people doing like panels and having conversations and discussion, but then also entertainment. They're doing it a little different this time. So they have panels with speakers, and then they're going to have music and comedy. So if you want more info about that, go to minds.com or send me an email and I'll make sure I get you the info. But I think that's it. Thank you guys for hanging out. Oh, I don't know who's playing in the Super Bowl. Clearly, I didn't know it was happening on Sunday, but Two Sisters and Some Yarn, give it up for her and Pirate Tomsky, the mods in the chat today. She says, "Go Chiefs." So, okay, I can get behind that. I'll be on your team. Go Chiefs. Oh yeah, and your average Patriot nerd says, "Have a great weekend. See some of you for Friday Night Tights." Yeah, Friday Night Tights is tonight. Go check it out. Always a fun time there. Okay, let me see if I can find this thing I have to play. Bye, guys. Thank you to today's sponsor, the Church on the Square of Georgetown, Texas, which happens to be my church. My church is no longer allowed to advertise on Facebook, which is unfortunate because that's how I and a lot of other church members originally found them. They've been told that they violate community standards. There's no details there of what that means, but you guys know the score. Anyway, since they're not allowed to advertise, I'm here to give them a plug. You can find them online at thechurchonthesquare.org. You can also find videos of all the sermons and some other kinds of content on their YouTube page at Church on the Square. You can also join us. If you happen to be in the Georgetown, Texas area, we meet every Sunday at Ken's Guitars, that's Kenz, Ken's Guitars, right on the Georgetown Square. We meet outside right on the square. Sometimes if the weather's nice, you might find us there. You might find us outside in front of Ken's. But if you're local, I hope to see you. Thank you. I didn't roll the outro yet in case you're still here, because it just reminded me, the ad reminded me, if you are in town for, my husband and I were having this house concert on Saturday and Sunday. If you're in town, I know some of you are, to come to one of our shows and you want to come to church with me, this Sunday would be a great Sunday. So talk to me at the show or what have you. That'll be fun. And we meet in a guitar shop. So it's like going from a music concert to a guitar shop church. That's what it'll be. But anyway, that's it. Have a good weekend, guys.